Hello and welcome to the final part of our Bastion playthrough here on Warcraft Radio. My name is Kexman, and as per the last part, we're here at the Temple of Courage because it appears as though Maldraxxus has invaded the Temple of Courage. We don't quite know how this happens. There is a cinematic that doesn't appear to be in the game files just yet. Obviously this is the first alpha build, so that can change quite quickly. Even in the next couple of hours as of this recording, a build could go up. It seems as though Nalthor the Rhymebinder, who is a lich using a new lich model that is actually quite nice, appears to be attacking basically the paragon of courage. Seems to be his main focus, and we are here helping someone called Thanikos, who appears to be one of the defenders of the temple here, potentially even another pole march that we saw previously in the last episode. There are some new undead models here that are quite nice. It's nice to see undead models for new expansions. They obviously use a similar skeleton to the previous one, so it's nothing that we're not used to, but it is definitely catching the eye. It does bring up the question though, how do undead work in the Shadowlands? Are they undouble dead? Undouble dead. I'm going with undouble dead from now on. Once obviously we've managed to push those through, Nalthor makes a run for it back to the Temple of Courage, and it is our job to make sure that we can get through and help the Paragon. Thanikos wants us to clear out the House of Construct forces, and we also have Mechanicos, who has joined us here, and he has managed to find Convenient Giant Robot. So we then have to obviously help him repair it. Over here there is another quest from Apollon. It's a little bit difficult to get to because there are constantly spawning forces. It can be a bit of a pain to actually speak to him to get him to stop killing for 5 seconds so we can actually say, hello, you want us to do something? Unfortunately, that probably isn't going to change, I wouldn't imagine. We do currently have rares in the alpha as Wingflayer the Cruel here, kind of looking Diablo-esque, has an angel stuck to his back in quite a horrific vision, which evidently hasn't been run yet on the alpha, so we don't know if horrific visions even work. And this is a standard kill quest area. There is a bar that we have to fill. We have to pick up pieces of machinery. There's 3 specific pieces for the Convenient Giant Robot, and we also have to free angels. It's not exactly engaging, but it's one of those quest areas that you see all the time in WoW. So we're going to skip through that and we're going to head directly to the next area. Again, you have to hand in even more quests to Apollon, which can be slightly difficult because there are constantly spawning mobs here, and without any warning he can run off to engage a mob, or a mob can even break off and start fighting you. So it can be difficult to hand in quests here. Maybe having Apollon stand slightly further back or have slightly fewer constructs coming through would be quite nice, but that's a small change. It's not necessarily going to break the game. Once you've obviously handed these quests in, you are then directed to the other side of the Temple of Courage grounds, which is also being assaulted by what we assumed to be Maldraxxus forces. These are slightly different. These are more skeletal rather than sort of the abominations and constructs that we have seen. Again, Giant Convenient Robot is fixed, but now needs to charge, so that's exactly what we're going to do. And we also have to make sure that any House of Construct forces we kill here, we need to sunder their souls. It's interesting to note that there's 2 different houses here. I misspoke just a second ago. The previous one was the House of Constructs, which featured abominations, similar sort of style enemies, ghouls if you will. This one is called the House of Rituals and seems to be mostly skeletal. So you've got wraiths, you have skeletal mages, you have necromancers. Whether or not that is indicative of what actually happens in Maldraxxus, we don't quite know. You'll also see that there was a mob that spawned another mob, basically similar to the Eye of Naxxramas. However, the mob doesn't engage. He just kind of stares at us in the distance. So that's something that could potentially be fixed. Here we use the crystal, and the crystal does have a slightly off model with Taurens. It doesn't quite sit well in the hands, it doesn't quite work in this model. I don't know whether it works with other models. I'll have to do some testing to find out, but that's something that could potentially be fixed. We move down to the Overlook, and while Mechanicos is helping to warm up the CGR, or Convenient Giant Robot, we have to help Thanakos from... We have to help him essentially keep the forces at bay, and this means we have to fight some more Maldraxxus forces. And again, this... I don't know whether this is a hint towards what Maldraxxus is as a zone, or whether or not this is something that we are going to learn from the zone as a whole, but it appears as though Kyrians who have died can be resurrected, because we can see here these are called Risen Magus and Risen Valiant. So is it a case of souls can be rezzed in the Shadowlands to become undouble dead? Is this a different process than reanimation of a body? Are these even bodies considered the same as bodies we have in Azeroth because we're in Shadowlands? This is the sort of stuff that is probably going to be answered, but if it isn't, then I will 100% want to know exactly how this works. It does seem slightly different, but again, we've been given no basis for this. Once Maldraxxus is out and we can actually see what Maldraxxus holds as a zone, it's entirely possible that we can see exactly what is at play here. Thanakos is slightly off with some of the combat. I mean, for example, here he doesn't seem to want to help, where in other battles he will wade in without any warning and he'll have 5 or 6 mobs on him and he won't die, and you'll just have to DPS them down. It's not quite right. We now have Maramor come in, and you'll see now what I'm talking about in regards to Thanakos. As soon as he starts attacking Maramor, there is almost no way that I can take any form of threat off him. Whether this means he's being designated as a quote-unquote tank NPC because I am a DPS, whether or not this changes slightly, depending on your spec. If I'd have joined this as protection, would Thanakos have been more of a damage dealer? Unsure at this time, but it's potentially something that can be tested in the future. Now, Maramor is a particularly easy fight. He does a breath ability, as any sort of Chimera do, and we now move over to Mechanicos, who has managed to charge up the Convenient Giant Robot. This I would like to see changed. We have to clear the blockade, however, there is one button to press, and it starts up the animation and then it's over. I would much rather have actually direct control over this, shooting the various mobs, being able to decide, you know, what I shoot. I would prefer to have that. It gives me a little bit more control over exactly what happens. Even though the outcome is the same, it just gives a little bit more... It gives a little bit more of a feeling to the quest, rather than just I've jumped in the mob, I'm pressing the button, animation's done, over. It's slightly more engaging. I can understand why people would prefer having this style where you press a button and ignore it, but I think for a quest line, especially something similar to this, having control over that would be better. We're now about to head into what is the actual dungeon zone, Necrotic Wake, which used to be the Temple of Courage. The Paragon was still there when Maldraxxus attacked, so it's time for us to go and help. And as we land, we actually discover that she's at full health and she doesn't actually really need our help. She seems to be holding her own quite well. Thanakos charges in, as you naturally would, and immediately it doesn't go well for him. It's a bit of a slow run. I don't know whether the animation is slightly off on that. It does seem as though he doesn't so much charge into battle as he does leisurely jog. Unfortunately, his leisurely jogging gets him caught by some gatekeepers, and he gets turned into Maragar. He gets turned into Thanakos Spine-Render, which seems to be an updated Maragar model. It's actually quite a nice model, and I'm happy to see an updated version of it, because Maragar was one of my favourite bosses. Unfortunately, this version of Maragar's Bone Storm leaves a lot to be desired. It's possible there could be a slight tuning issue with this character, with this NPC. The Bone Storm doesn't actually appear to do any damage, which is slightly strange. It does damage, but the damage is so minute that it actually isn't. It's not worth dodging. You can just stand in it and DPS away. Keynote here: the Paragon of Courage that is currently helping you. If you AFK, the Paragon of Courage will kill this mob by themselves. You don't have to do anything. So, if anyone from Blizzard is watching, make sure she doesn't do as much damage, so you actually have to help out. The death animation for Thanakos doesn't seem to be complete. I believe there's supposed to be some form of explosion afterwards, but this one just seems to stay in a big clump of bones. Unfortunately, the weather update has said that this area is going to face bombardment from Maldraxxus, so now it's time to get out of there. The Paragon of Courage has actually gone deeper into the necrotic wake to face off against Amarth, one of the minions of Nalthor, and that kind of ties into how we go there to help out the Paragon come necrotic wake. And thus concludes the storyline here in Bastion. It's, in my opinion, a really, really fun story. It's one that, once I'd completed it, I was like, oh, okay, I'm level 52. That was actually a really smooth questline. I'm genuinely very, very impressed with what Blizzard have done here. It's an impressive start to Shadowlands. And I'll see you guys next time here on Warcraft Radio.